Of all the technological and sociological revolutions that humanity's experienced, I'd argue that AI has crossed most rapidly and most profoundly from being niche to pervasive in the shortest period of time that certainly I can recall. It's not just a futuristic experiment anymore. It's here and it's now, and it's changing, it's automating how we assemble, process and create ideas and content. And in so doing, it's changing how we make decisions. Now, that change is not just taking place in the minds of experienced executives and adults. It's also taking place in the formative minds of those yet to complete their education before they've entered the workforce, which raises interesting questions. Are these new hires losing their critical thinking skills by relying too much on AI? Could the over-automation of content creation lead to a cognitive debt across our workforce? Put simply, while AI continues to get smarter, do we run the risk of becoming collectively dumber? Hey there and welcome to the AI Forecast. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present and the future of data and AI in the enterprise every week. Now, you've heard me say this before if you're a regular listener. If you haven't already, though, make sure to like, share and subscribe. We really do appreciate the support that brings. And speaking of support, a massive thank you to the show's sponsor, Cloudera, for bringing this podcast to life. Well, today we're going to explore the feedback loop between human and machine and explore how we bridge the gap between technical innovation and human judgment. To do that, I'm joined by Cassie Kozyrkov, who many of you are likely to know for pioneering the discipline of decision intelligence. Cassie's a globally recognized AI leader and data science pioneer with over 15 years' experience guiding organizations through responsible AI transformation. Formerly Google's first Chief Decision Scientist, and now founder and CEO of Kozyr, she's helped Fortune 500 companies and institutions like NASA, Meta, and GSK unlock the power of data-driven decision-making at scale. Welcome to the podcast, Cassie.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Paul.
It's awesome having you. Where do you join us from today?
I'm in Miami, which is usually sunny Miami, but not at the moment.
Well, we're glad to have you here. We're going to jump into the topic of the feedback loop between humans and AI, as we spoke about at the beginning, and how, while we might be changing it, it might be changing us. But before we do that, we like to start off with a little lightning round, the Fast Four. Are you ready to play the game?
Oh, dear. Oh, I was born ready.
It's perfectly safe.
I'm so
all right,
ready. I'm so ready that I knew that there was a lightning round. No, all right.
There you go. All right, well,
for me?
Let's go. All right. First question I ask everyone I meet. What would people who know you best say is your superpower?
They might say that I'm pretty good at changing minds, but I know that people who know me less well tend to frequently refer to my analogies and my ways of simplifying complex things. And I imagine that one helps the other. So maybe my actual superpower is something like thought surgery, but this will just creep out everybody who's tuned into this podcast. So don't allow your thoughts to be surgerized without your consent.
You will be memorable, though. So thought surgery, I like that. That is now officially your superpower.
All right, good.
Next question. The most impactful technology of all time.
Oh, I will divide the room and say contraception.
First time answer and a brilliant one. I'd expect nothing less, Cassie. Why did you choose that?
Because the technologies that we tend to point to have small, diffuse impact on how life turns out. But I imagine, and how the world ends up being shaped. But if you think about all the combinations of humans that we did and did not get, and the difference in world, it's a toss-up, right? If you say impact, I give you the straight answer.
All right, next one. What would you like to see AI automate for you personally in your future? We talk about what it does for everyone else and what it could do for businesses, but what would Cassie like to see AI do for Cassie?
I've uttered the string, you could make it 100 times more expensive for each thing and I would still pay. I get so much value out of AI as it is. And yet, there is a long way to go towards the kind of user friendliness where I have a thought, I have a vision, and then that vision is executed. We are nowhere near that. So what I would love to have automated is my whims safely. And I hope we get to talk about the automation of whims and how that might not be safe without some added skills and guardrails.
That's definitely the topic for today. I've likened it recently to dealing with a really well-read but somewhat incompetent intern would be the best way I'd describe generative AI on a bad day. All right, last but not least, as someone who works with data a lot, I'm sure you either have conscious or subconscious hacks, things that you do with data or things, or just maybe a way you think about data that just helps you get more out of it than others. What would one of the best practices be you've learned as someone who works with data every day?
Well, let's start with the basic. I discourage pronouncing it with a capital D. And I think that a lot of people do this. They treat data as if it's some magical thing that we can invoke that leads to truthiness. Data is memory. And what we record and what we get access to and what we're later able to analyze is definitely a function of whatever we thought was important and worth paying attention to at the time that we collected it. And so I think that there's a huge bridge that can quite easily be crossed by between the people who have created a data set in their lives and those who have not. And I mean created one intentionally, like a diary that's a spreadsheet. See how long you can track simple things about your day over the course of a month. And I think you will learn a thing or two about data, including those moments when you might be tempted to fudge one of the numbers because you didn't do yesterday's entry and now you can't remember it. And that is the story of what real data is. Real data is messy. Real data has unexpected and undocumented gotchas in it. Real data turns out differently depending on which human designed it. And the design of real data is more of an art than a science. So I think even starting there, that what is data? Data as electronic memory that's shareable, that's searchable. Can't be understated how beautiful and valuable that is, but also quite fallible. Fallible as we humans are fallible.
I did not realize that we could do a 45-minute podcast on data, but I've got so many questions for you just on that one answer. However, that's not the topic of today's discussion, but you know what? I'd love to get you back and just literally listen to you talk about data because you've blown my mind with that response. Talking about data being memory, let's go down memory lane for a bit. For those of listeners not familiar with you, tell us a bit about your background.
Oh, how far back do we go?
Look, go to your childhood. Why not? We'll treat this as
go to my childhood. Clear. Well, I don't know that there's a cure. But speaking of data, and speaking of talking for hours about data, so when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I discovered the most beautiful thing in the universe, which everybody knows is, of course, the spreadsheet. And of course, obviously, I don't know, what did you do when you were 8? Didn't you have a gemstone collection whose entire purpose was to give you one more row for each gemstone into your lovely spreadsheet? This, by the way, this is just one more reason why I can't have a straight face when people pronounce data with a capital D. I'm like, don't you know where data comes from? 8-year-olds make data. This is where it comes from.
That's brilliant.
Yes, but that's how far back we should go to explain that I have a complicated, loving but not respectful relationship with data, which I think can rub data folk the wrong way. They expect me to be very much like, rah, data is always awesome. And I will say it's quite beautiful, sure. But if a data point falls in a forest, if an opinion falls in a forest, and no actions are changed based on it, if I deeply, deeply believe in Santa Claus and I'm not going to do anything about it, then I would say it doesn't matter. Data only begins to matter, what we think we know begins to matter, when it's going to drive us to action. And then the way that we would think about the data, it makes sense to think about the data from the perspective of what actions it's in danger of actually affecting. So data points are pretty, but it's decisions, it's through our actions that we impact the world around us. So it's decisions that are important.
You're performing surgery on my mind as we speak. I'm just, as I say.
This is to say childhood and data moved on to seeing the important thing, which is decision making, and trying to study it in all its forms, including neuroeconomics. That's a thing. Feel free to ask me about my graduate degree in neuroeconomics. I have another one in mathematics and statistics. I talk about being a recovering statistician. Many jobs related to teaching, data, research. And eventually we find me at Google joining the research and machine intelligence group as a statistician. So once recovering, always recovering. You never get the grumpy out. Statisticians are the grumpiest of the data folk. I can explain that in a separate one.
The dismal science.
The dismal newer science, yes. I also have a degree in the actual dismal science, which is economics, because it's another decision discipline, the study of scarcity. I find that to be a very poetic notion. It certainly caught me on day one. Oh, scarcity, let us study this. So I get to Google before Google has the title of data scientist. And like many data scientists, I can tell you, so many of us have had our job title changed to data scientist without our responsibilities changing in the least. So I've enjoyed that rite of passage as well. And the thing about data science is it really needs understanding and connection to other disciplines. It on its own is not automatically useful. And this is funny because data science can be called the discipline of making data useful, and yet the discipline of making data useful is not itself useful. It's a problem. And it's a problem because of all the other participation of all the other roles and functions that need to pass the baton back and forth to get things to work well. And there has been a lot of hope historically. Like, we hope we're going to hire smart people. We hope we're going to put them all in a room, and we hope they're going to do something useful. And there is a better and more effective way to get value from data. And so the decision nerd in me was looking at the statistics and data science work that I was doing from how can we increase the effectiveness of this process so that we can serve something useful, so that we can lead to better decision making at scale. And so that was my journey in Google, from a researcher starting out in the machine intelligence group all the way through to becoming Google's first chief data scientist, yes, then chief decision scientist.
To think that, you know, a little girl's gemstone collecting hobby could lead them to become a chief decision scientist at Google is, yeah, as I say, I like to think that there's a parent out there listening, looking at the little girl now going, hey, why don't you maybe play with a spreadsheet? It's not so weird after all. I think that's great. No, really, thank you for sharing that story. It's huge.
I will say it's very soothing, and little data entry with a little glass of wine, not at age 8, later. It's just a thing on a Saturday night.
Thank you for clarifying that for those listeners who may be thinking that your 8-year-old needs to quaff a bit of Shiraz. Let's talk a bit about AI because, and obviously we're going to talk about that feedback loop, and I want to get to the MIT study that was published in June in just a second. But before we do that, there's obviously a lot of positive and somewhat negative spin around the use of AI to do research and content creation. Maybe let's just start with a little bit about on the dark side of the hype around AI. At a high level, how would you characterize some of the concerns that you see, or maybe that others are seeing?
I have particular concerns, but these are not the ones that we will bring up now. The ones that we'll bring up now to stay on topic, which is, oh goodness, keep her on topic. The darkness of it is that it seems to reveal negative aspects of human character. I don't know, like laziness, thoughtlessness, lack of care, all these things, and particularly when it comes to endeavors like content creation, research, you know, the noble arts of advertising. Okay. But when we think of things that are beautiful when they are crafted through thoughtful effort, and we see an option to produce them without any effort, I think it raises some questions. Should we be doing that? Should we be skipping the effort? And with research, should we be finding results that we haven't spent enough time getting the background to understand? How will we make sense of the work that we do. And I'm very sympathetic to this line of thinking. I can see why we want the best for humankind, but it's also got this little element of grumpily getting cross at the kids these days, who are far dumber than every preceding generation, right? It seems like one of those things. I imagine that individuals, there's a lot of variability from individual to individual, individuals who want to be creative, individuals who want to put the effort in, have brilliant tools at their disposal that will elevate them much higher than they could have done when they had to apply a lot of toil. I'm pretty glad that I don't have to grind my own papyrus, or however papyrus is made. See, I don't even know how papyrus is made. I can write on paper without knowing about papyrus. How dare I? The Egyptians would be mortified. Look how easy typing is. I don't have to clack, clack, clack on the big difficult keyboard. And I don't have to do long division. I can, just ask my phone. And so you get this impression that I would be dumber and dumber. And yet, I challenge any medieval peasant who's going to come at me and say, what I spend my time on all day is a bunch of nonsense. I don't know how to build my own hut. I don't know how to plant my own wheat field, right? Like, clearly, I've lost all my skills. I would say, let's see who's more effective at modern life, right? The world moves on. Those who want to spend a lot of time thinking, those who want to spend a lot of time developing their minds, they have the opportunity to go so much further than they could have gone if they had to plant their own wheat and grind their own papyrus and all the rest of it. I also see that those who want to be lazy and those who want to be thoughtless and those who want to put in as little effort as possible can get something out of that non-effort, which is quite amazing for how far a little will go. And that stirs up emotions, right? That's where this whole line of inquiry comes out of, not yours, but the folks writing about this that we're reacting to. I'd say if you can see how much you can get out of so little, imagine how much you can get out of so much. I don't think that we are making ambitious people less ambitious. I don't think that we are making thoughtful people less thoughtful. I think that we're just showing what you can do with very little, which is that's a very, very different thing. Now, what I worry about is much less this kind of lazy, bad art and bad writing and bad science and bad homework. What I worry about is leaders and citizens not being prepared for technology, these very transformative technologies. I worry about the problem of AI as a proliferation of magic lamps with genies in them. And it's not the genie that's dangerous. You can make the genie as big and strong as you like. The two things that are much more of a problem is, what's the nature of the lamp? Can the lamp actually keep the genie contained? And in the world of agentic AI, the lamp is the much more interesting question than the genie itself. And then, of course, the most interesting question is, how skilled is the wisher? How responsible? How thoughtful? How much did you think through what you actually asked for? And if we spend all our time hyper-focused on genies, how are we training responsible wishers? How are we training skilled wishers? How are we building good tools so that wishers are able to say what they mean what they say, and not end up asking for something that they hoped was going to be a good idea and was actually nowhere near what would have been good for them instead?
There's another hour podcast in just that response, because we could get into the idea of the paperclip optimizer as an example of a bad wish or a bad agent, and equally we could talk about my intern analogy, which is, an intern isn't necessarily a bad or good thing. I learned a lot about interns, which is most of the time I had malformed requests for them, so I'd send them off to do a task, and it wasn't their work that was bad, it was the nature of the question or the task that I gave them being so ill-specified that they thought they'd gotten it right when they hadn't. In other words, is there anything really new in this? It's all about quality of the ask as much, or the quality of the brief as much as it is about the person you're briefing or the agent you're briefing.
Mm-hmm.
Can we pause for a second? I want to talk a bit about this MIT study because, somewhat
Please.
controversially, it popped up in June and introduced this notion of cognitive debt, the idea that just like the calculator being introduced into the classroom, over-reliance on AI tools, whichever one it might be, would erode our ability to think deeply or, rely on these tools as a crutch, perhaps take away good judgment or the ability to sense the quality of a response. What's your take on specifically generative AI tools impacting the way young people start to think about how they do their homework, basically?
I will note that I wrote about that particular study in my newsletter, which is decision.substack.com. And spoiler alert, there was a little evisceration. I'm not going to go through, as a recovering also neuroscientist, what I felt about that study. But what I think I concluded my piece with was I would have liked to see the authors turn ChatGPT onto critiquing their experimental design, but then they might not have felt as fulfilled by it, something like that, right? There is just so much in how that study was conducted and designed that, well, let's say, leaves room for improvement. So folks who are interested in the nitty-gritty of that, you can find that on my newsletter. Long story short, though, it's like, should I be surprised that if I use a forklift, I don't get big biceps, right? It's like, that's the kind of conclusion that study jumps to. Also, lack of control of populations, lack of control of the motivation. But essentially, why should I expect that I'm going to put a lot of cognitive load into a task that isn't that engaging, isn't that fun, isn't that useful, isn't that interesting, that I, as the participant, wasn't particularly drawn to, that experimenters made me do, and they gave me a shortcut way of achieving it, this unfun thing, and I used the shortcut, and surprise, I don't remember or put as much effort in as if I hadn't been given the shortcut. Great, we have a shortcut out of misery that doesn't say very much about the brain, I don't think. We're used to the fact that when you use a tool to make something easier.
Well, I suppose it says a lot about the brain, but not stuff that we didn't already know, which is that, yeah, as you say, if forced to do something really, really hard, or alternatively use automation to do it, using the automation's a good get out.
I'd love to give the listeners the quick Neuroscience 101. Just not about left brain, right brain, which region, prefrontal, occipital, right? None of that. Neuroscience 101 is logic to me, why we need the brain for what we're talking about. Why do we need to invoke the brain? Usually we don't. And when we see studies that are invoking the brain, when talking about behavior would have been plenty, I'm not sure that that's what good science looks like. And I'm very sorry, MIT, but yeah, don't test my love for you.
Let's talk about the idea, though, that there is something about the process of, let's take your gemstone collection, or we can talk about Vera Rubin and all the work she did with data, literally as a computer back in the day when the numbers passed through her brain, the tip of her pencil, and onto a piece of paper, and was able to better intuit and calibrate what she was seeing in the data because she'd spent so much time soaking in it. I know as an executive running businesses that I can be in a room full of people and spot, whether we call it dodgy data or dodgy analysis, I can see it and intuit it nearly instantaneously because I've spent so much time soaking in it, computing it from raw principles. My neural pathways, I suppose, have developed. I can't call it an AI. It's an I, an intelligence, faulty as it might be. But and I should say, I'm burdened by confirmation bias and all those other problems that humans have. But it is better as a subjective term. But I feel it's made me better at being an executive. And Vera was a great astronomer because they spent so much time soaking in the data and doing that hard graft. Is there some validity to the idea that if we trivialize the process of working with data and automate it away, we're losing some faculty or some edge over others? What are your thoughts on that question?
I want to be careful with this one because there's a difference between taking what used to take you 8 hours and spending only 5 minutes, calling it done, and moving on with your life. And while you would have had days and days and days filled with 8-hour commitment, now you have days and days filled with 5-hour commitment. I imagine that you may have meditated on astronomy a little less. But if you instead use tools to spend 8 hours, I would bet on that person as a challenger. I put my money on them to out astronomer, not that I know much about astronomy, but to out astronomer Vera's astronomy, the other astronomer.
So let's talk about how the tools, so, you know, we've talked a little bit about the media popularizing some of the concerns, but let's talk about how some of these tools could make me stronger. What are some of the strengths that, especially the generation being born into generative AI tools, what's some of the sort of skills or capabilities that you think that we are developing or should be developing?
So many, and I'm so excited. I'm actually really, really excited for humanity's future. I think great opportunities coming up here. And among them is nuance. Nuance on so many levels. We're moving from, in our education, where everybody had to study the same thing and memorize the same thing, to a model where it would make sense for different students to study different things more aligned with their aptitudes and interests from different perspectives. If you love butterflies, you could learn all your mathematics just about butterflies and applied to butterflies. And that would be so difficult to set up and so difficult to evaluate and so difficult to teach, except with these tools, you could do it. You have the ability to cognitively offload, to bring us back to a good old MIT study, a lot of your toil and a lot of holding things in your mind that could make space for something better to think about, could elevate your thinking if you were motivated. Again, if what you're trying to do is spend as little time as possible, as always, any student who wants to be in the classroom as little as possible is then in an adversarial relationship with their teacher, and the teacher has to use tools and tricks and so on to trick them into turning 5 minutes back into 8 hours. And you know what? With AI, you got plenty of opportunity for that as well. You can out-trick the tricks. So good stuff as well. But the flourishing that we can get from nuance, from personalization, from being able to carve out niches we didn't even think were possible, and the eventual matching algorithms that we will have that will help us discover much better than we do today people who would be interested in our niches and would help us flourish in our excitement to see just how individually weird we could be while still being useful and productive to society. There has been so much one-size-fits-all stuff, which is easy to grade. It's not necessarily good for the students. It's pretty good for teachers. So much one-size-fits-allness in education. I would love to see some of that light go through a prism, right? So that we could have a scattering from everything is one-size-fits-all and looks the same to different interests, different angles, different perspectives, different curricula. Things that are just not logistically possible without these types of tools.
Let's use I suppose, as topical example. Going back to look at Cassie as an 8-year-old or a developing young adult, how do you think generative AI tools would change Cassie's development if you were to sort of apply it back to your own history? I mean, have you got some thoughts about what that feedback loop might look like?
How I actually had to study is this is what's on the one-size-fits-all curriculum. And since I grew up in South Africa, there was a lot of emphasis on memorization in those days, which I don't know how much the world has grown out of that, but please, world, grow out of memorization. Memorization is fantastic when there was one copy of the medicine and law book in some village, and you had to trek to that village and see how much of it you could memorize and then go back to your own village to practice whatever law or medicine could fit in your head. That's not the world we live in today. Memory is a commodity, so good riddance to memorization. When you what desert island are we preparing kids for that they won't be able to look something up right then and there? If you've lost the internet, you have bigger problems, civilization, than that kids can't look a fact up, or
they're going to need to make their own papyrus.
Some syntax up. Right, exactly. You've got bigger problems.
Going to make papyrus again.
Exactly. I can't remember how to make the papyrus. So memorization is something that we're so used to treating like an important skill that we must develop, but we would be okay being less developed in it. Replace some memorization with some creativity, some innovative thinking, some decision skills, leadership, interpersonal, social skills, right? All these things, pretty good and useful. Good riddance to the memorization, but there were so many things that were just utterly boring, and I have never needed them ever again. And we could have filled that space with things that would have lit me up. How would we have done that? Either if I have a full-time tutor that is going to cater everything to my needs. I didn't have that, right? That's for the very few, a full-time human tutor who's going to try to, see, oh, she seems to be interested in this. Let's give her more of this. Oh, she likes that. Let's give her more of that. You could have that with AI. You could see, this is what the kid is gravitating to. These are the concepts that need to be injected. Let's put the two together so that we can get motivated learning. So why does learning have to feel like suffering? Learning's pretty great. You build your brain, you become a better version of yourself, doing things that hopefully you enjoy. Well, why do we believe that learning has to be torture or school has to be torture? But you can't achieve this by simply asking teachers to teach differently without tools. You would need to have tools that allow hyper-personalization, and AI is that pathway.
Yeah, but it's so interesting to me because I wonder if Cassie is Cassie because she did have to go through that pain, and I suppose that's the philosophical element of this, and I suppose that's also what the MIT study was trying to touch on, perhaps in a way that may not have been as rigorous as you would have liked, but the idea that, is the suffering part of the journey of forming those neural pathways and of setting you up for future success. And we don't necessarily need to answer the question, but I suppose it's the one that is maybe even going through executives' minds is, my intern needs to go through the suffering because I went through the suffering and I turned out all right. Therefore, you need to go through the suffering too. It's almost tautological.
Well, I'll say a thing on this podcast that a lot of people don't know about me, in case it's inspirational, on the topic of suffering through the suffering. So I'll preface it by saying that I have 2 graduate degrees, and then I will dunk it by saying, and I dropped out of high school because it was boring and college had much more interesting things to study. So I don't know that I'm a role model for, go through the suffering, it's good for you. I instead said, no, take me to university where I can study whatever I want.
All right, so let's talk then about the executive who is thinking that they've got an intern and my intern needs to go through the suffering. How would a leader balance the kind of benefits that AI can bring, but also make sure that their teams are developing useful skills to them and to the business?
Always start from what is it all for? What are we trying to achieve? And then we work backwards from there. If we get stuck on this is the way we've done it because we've always done it this way, so this must surely be the best way to do it tomorrow, that's assuming that the world hasn't changed. And with rapidly evolving technologies like AI, it's pretty much a guarantee that the world is changing and the world will be different. And so it's a hell of a bet to expect that what worked for generations is going to be exactly the perfect solution in the next round in such a rapidly changing world. So instead, let's take a more pragmatic and kind of compassionate approach. Start from scratch and say, what are we trying to achieve? What do we want in our workers? If we don't have the ability to do any kind of, experimentation and we have to make a rapid decision, we go with what we know, right? That makes sense. And let's then be honest about why we're making that decision that way. We don't have the resources to try something else. But question that assumption. It's quite cheap to try it. With these consumer AI technologies, one of the things that is transformational is that it makes the economics of advice different. Advice has never been cheaper. And so before, you would have the skill of go ask a human on your most important questions. You think something can be done better, you think you can be better in some way. The good instinct is to go find a human to ask. You should still do that. You should still ask humans for advice. But now, it's so cheap to also ask AI. So anybody who's not asking, how can I improve this or how can I improve that, hasn't realized that you could do so many things that you already do a little better. So you can also maybe do a little audit of yourself. Take a look at your query history. That's what you're claiming is important enough to ask about, important enough to improve, important enough to spend your time on. If you looked at it as an audit of that, would you like how you're doing things, or would you make an adjustment? Maybe get a little bit deeper in touch with what's enough of a priority to improve in your life.
One of the observations I've made previously wasn't in relation to AI, it was in relation to cloud technology, was we've raised a probably half a century, it's fair to say, of engineers in the world of IT who were taught how to build. And suddenly cloud came along, and I would submit it's fair to say that we realised we'd made a mistake and we hadn't taught people how to buy. We hadn't taught them how to properly specify what they were asking for. They were just used to building it. If they needed it, they built it. They were engineers. Mm-hmm. And we had this skills gap and this deficit in terms of a group of people who are now in charge of basically procurement and assembly, and they were missing some critical skills around how to do that. I'd say that that's now rapidly converged to something more functional. With AI, would it be fair to say that we haven't taught people how to ask the right questions, or maybe put differently, how to properly form a request for work? Yes. I certainly, as I say, I see it with interns. I almost feel like I send them on rock fetching exercises because I don't know how to describe what it is I actually want until I see it.
Exactly. When answers become really, really cheap, the questions matter more than ever. Hmm. And I also bring this up in conversations with data scientists. Data scientists will say, oh, what is our job going to be once the tools become so easy that anybody can use them? And the answer is, it's the same job. It's the same clarity of thinking. It's how you think. It's not the tools that you use that matters. It's how you express yourself. Even if the tool makes it really, really easy to express yourself. Like, it's much harder to express yourself with punch cards than with C++, than, with a prompt, right? Clearly. Still, the clarity of knowing what's worth saying in the first place, and knowing when you're being ambiguous and constraining that ambiguity, when you can express yourself in your mother tongue, as opposed to in mathematics, you've got a lot more opportunity for ambiguity to creep in there. So then it's up to you to think clearly and communicate clearly so that you squish that ambiguity back out. And the more permissive the tool, the harder you have to actually work at that. That's still part of it. That's the job.
As we lean on our logos instead of our pathos, is what I'm hearing there.
Well, I don't know.
Okay, so let's talk about because you've touched on or around the edges of this idea of the headline of the moment is the AI took my job. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that fear more broadly? Whether you're a lawyer, a statistician, a data scientist, it doesn't matter. I mean, a music, Nick Cave famously had a song created in the style of Nick Cave. We've seen, cartoons created. It seems like all of the creative industries are being threatened with the idea the AI is coming to take your jobs. What's your take on that?
Change is rough. Even change for the better. Any kind of upheaval that's not compassionately managed is rough. And some compassion needs to blunt the exuberance slightly here. Because even changes for the better will mean that some people lose their jobs. And those people can be so excited by all the innovations and so ready and willing to adapt themselves and change and learn. And there will still be time that it takes to make that adjustment. And during that time, there will be uncertainty. There will be worries about the future, worries that wouldn't exist if we lived in a world where, dress shopping would be you buy your dress for the next 20 years. It's how it used to be in the old days, and then it became for the next season, and then, it's for tomorrow and out. That kind of change and rate of acceleration, it has winners and it has losers. And if we're not honest about that in how we talk about it.
Hey, I know we're running out of time. I wanted to wrap up with a question that I've been dying to ask you and relating to decision intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you could take a minute to briefly describe the concept of decision intelligence to the uninitiated, and then talk a little bit about how you think business leaders could use that sort of framework of concepts to help employees make better decisions with AI, just rather than just automating them for the sake of automation.
My preferred definition is that decision intelligence is the discipline of turning information into, one version is say optimal action. I actually prefer hopefully better action. A little more humility to the definition, right? Turning information to hopefully better action.
I love
any
that.
Scale, any setting, right? There's the arrogance coming back. Any scale, any setting. So what this means is break down the silos, the walls between the decision disciplines. What is quantitative and qualitative? Why do we have that boundary? Why should we have people completely unable to deal with framing a decision and executing a decision when there's no data versus when you're dealing with petabytes of data? Right? Usually, if you want to be an expert in decision making, you should be able to think about all versions. And so decision intelligence is that decision-oriented discipline, right? It starts with what are the changes that we're considering? How do we want the world to be different? It's about having that vision and imagination, but not just being a discipline of vision, imagination, and hot air, but also, hey, if we do have the ability to automate at petabyte scale, how would we practically do that? And how would we do that in a way that fits our vision? What you'll find when you go down the decision intelligence path is that you will meet a lot of the components and a lot of the disciplines that you're already used to seeing. But you will pick them up in an order that will be more likely to bring you success rather than white papers, which is quite often what you get down the other path, which may be success for you, but for business people, typically a bunch of smart people in a room producing white papers, unless that's a research department, is not what you're aiming for. You have a lot of folks who want a technology for that technology's sake. And hey, if all you want with AI is to be able to tell your friend that you've got AI, there is a way to do that with minimal cost, minimal risk. Make a logo generator, I don't know, and don't let it touch anything mission critical. So if you're going to do automation with data at scale, inviting complexity into your business, which is what AI stands for. Why do we use data for automation? It's because the problem was too complex to handcraft a solution for. So you're going to invite all that complexity. That complexity brings risk and opportunity. There had better be some good reason why you would do that. And it's starting with that reason and arranging everything that way. And perhaps AI is not what you need at all. Good riddance. There's so many cases where it is what you need, is the only way to solve your problem. And when you solve your problem with AI, you make you do the technology, you do all of us proud, you do the technology proud. But when you're just hung up on using this latest bauble, unless what you want to do is train your workforce for a future project and you're happy to accept some waste for the current one, hey, maybe stop, think, and wait until a leader has some clarity on what is actually worth doing. That's where we have to center it all. And I don't see it centered there nearly enough. What's worth doing? It's that blank page effect. We see it at all layers. The worst is the leadership layer. Once we make the how easy, now you have to ask yourself what's worth doing. And we could spend days, weeks, quarters, years on the how, forgetting that we haven't answered the question of why we're here in the first place. Take all that how away, make the answers easy. And now the questions matter.
I love that. I cannot thank you enough for joining us. As I say, I'd love to get you back on just to literally listen to you eulogize on data. Proper noun or not, discuss.
Wait, is eulogy the one for if it's died?
And again, an open question for you. I'll just sit back and listen. Where can people go to learn more if they're interested in hearing more about your work?
So you can join my newsletter at decision.substack.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, and I've always got the to-do list of being active on other platforms too. So if anyone feels like a little charity, like, share, subscribe on any of the other ones that I'm minimally on. But yeah, it's LinkedIn and it's decision.substack.com. And yeah, if people found anything interesting in here, I always appreciate being told via a comment, because I honestly have no idea. It's just me and Paul playing, and if this was completely alien to everybody, I will not know. So if something was fun here or something was memorable, please tag me and tell me what you thought.
Deeply fascinating. Loved hearing it. You've performed surgery on my brain. I will never forget that. Cassie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap, everyone. Do you feel AI is making you intellectually lazy, or is your LLM a superpower? Drop your thoughts, as Cassie mentioned, into the comment section, or hit us up on LinkedIn. You can use the handle at Cloudera with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks again to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast podcast. Thanks for tuning in. You don't actually tune in. We don't have radios anymore. That's a sort of throwback to an older time.
But they could if they wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a hipster thing now. Somewhere in New York, people are using old radios.
With headphones. Wired headphones, as the kids these days are doing.
We'll see you all next week.